dare walk away from me when I am talking to you! Look at me!
I got work to do.
You know, there's a specific kind of silence you only get in the Montana high country right before a storm breaks. It's heavy, electric, and it makes the hair on your arm stand up, which is exactly how I felt standing at my front gate at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning, watching a woman in a silk bathrobe scream at a sheriff's deputy that I was a domestic terrorist because I turned off a spigot on my own property. My name is Caleb Thorne, I'm 52 years old, and after spending 3 decades operating heavy machinery and fighting wildland fires across the Pacific Northwest, I bought 40 acres of peace and quiet in Silver Creek Valley to retire, run a few head of cattle, and mostly just be left the hell alone. But apparently, alone is a concept that doesn't register with Patricia Vance, the self-appointed queen bee of the meadows, a cookie-cutter subdivision that popped up on my southern fence line like a bad rash about 2 years ago, marketing itself as luxury rustic living to folks who think owning a pair of cowboy boots makes them a rancher. Patricia, or Patty as she insisted everyone call her before things went south, is one of those people who mistakes a Facebook group admin badge for a sheriff's badge, a woman who treats the world like it's a personal customer service department and she's always waiting to speak to the manager. It started subtly enough, the way these range wars always do, with a wave across the fence that felt more like an inspection than a greeting, then the passive-aggressive notes about my unsightly tractor parked in view of her patio, and eventually the requests to share my resources because, in her words, we were all part of the same ecosystem. I ignored it, mostly, because when you've stared down a wall of fire moving 40 miles an hour, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard doesn't exactly register as a threat level midnight, at least not until I found the trench. See, I have an old irrigation main that runs parallel to the south fence, a high-pressure line I installed myself back when I was reclaiming the pasture, fed directly from a deep aquifer well that I paid 30 grand to drill, permitted, and deeded to my land, Thorns Ridge. I hadn't walked that fence line in a month because of a knee surgery that kept me hobbling around the house, but when I finally took my heater, a beat-up old blue heeler named Buster, out for a perimeter check, I saw it, a wet spot in the dirt that shouldn't be there in August. I followed the damp earth until I found a patch of ryegrass that was suspiciously greener than the rest, and after digging down about 6 inches with my boot, I hit plastic. It wasn't my pipe, it was a cheap, hardware store garden hose that had been spliced, sloppily, I might add, into my pressure valve using a splitter that looked like it was installed by a blind beaver. The hose snaked under the barbed wire, through the brush, and vanished into the manicured hedges of Patty Vance's backyard, specifically feeding a massive, gurgling rock fountain that I'd seen her bragging about on social media. I didn't get mad, not right then, because anger is a waste of energy when you have leverage, so I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my valve key, and turned the main shutoff to the closed position, hearing the satisfying clunk of the brass seating home, cutting off the flow not just to the illegal splice, but to that entire sector of my irrigation. I capped it, locked it, and went back to the house to brew a pot of coffee, figuring I'd get a confused text or maybe a knock on the door asking if there was a leak. I underestimated her audacity by a country mile. The next morning, the flashing lights woke me up before the rooster did, 2 county cruisers idling at my gate with Patty standing between them like she was blocking a tank column in Tiananmen Square, wearing that ridiculous silk robe and pointing a finger at my house like she was casting a hex. I walked down the driveway, coffee mug in hand, Buster trotting beside me with his hackles raised because dogs always know bad character before humans do. "That's him," she shrieked the second I got within earshot, her voice cracking like dry timber. "That's the man who assaulted me and cut off my life support." The deputy, a young guy named Miller who I'd known since he was playing high school football, looked at me with an expression that was 1 part exhaustion and 2 parts apology. "Morning, Caleb," Miller said, tipping his hat. "Ms. Vance here says you threatened her with a weapon and sabotaged her utility lines, creating a health hazard." I took a slow sip of coffee, looked at Patty, then back at Miller. "A weapon?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady, the way you talk to a spook horse. Patty jumped in before he could answer. "A wrench. A giant, heavy iron wrench. He brandished it at me over the fence when I asked him why my water pressure dropped." Now, I hadn't seen Patty in 3 days, and the valve key I used was about the size of a pencil, but facts weren't exactly the currency Patty was trading in. "Patty," I said, ignoring her theatrics, "that line you're tapped into is an agricultural main on private property, my private property. It doesn't connect to your house. It connects to that illegal splice you ran to your fountain. I turn it off because you're stealing water." Her face went a shade of purple that I didn't think was biologically possible, and she stomped her foot, literally stomped it, sending a puff of dust over her fuzzy slippers. It is our water, she yelled. The aquifer is a shared community asset. You don't own the water under the ground, you selfish hoarder. My landscape features require constant flow or the pumps will burn out. That represents thousands of dollars in damages. Miller sighed, shifting his weight. If the connection is on Mr. Thorne's land and it's his well, that's a civil issue, not a criminal one. And unless you have proof he threatened you. I have rights, she screamed, lunging toward the gate bars like she was going to rip them off the hinges. I am the president of the Meadows HOA, and we have an easement. An implied easement of usage. She grabbed the metal rail of my gate and shook it, trying to rattle the lock, but the gate is solid steel set in concrete, so all she managed to do was vibrate herself. Then, in a move that was almost impressive in its stupidity, she threw herself backward onto the gravel, crying out, "He hit me. He swung the gate and hit me." Miller and I watched her flop around on the ground for a solid 5 seconds in total silence. Miller said, his patience visibly evaporating. Mr. Thorne is 10 feet away from the gate. We are watching you. She stopped rolling, sat up, dusted off her robe, and glared at us with eyes that were cold, hard, and terrifyingly calculated. This isn't over, she hissed, standing up with a dignity she didn't deserve. My brother is a partner at Vance & Associates, and he specializes in resource litigation. You think you can just dry us out? You think you can bully this community? You're going to lose this ranch, old man. She marched back to her oversized SUV, slammed the door, and peeled out, leaving Miller shaking his head. Watch your back, Caleb, he murmured. Crazy doesn't have a reverse gear. He was right, because 48 hours later, the cease and desist letter showed up, courier delivered, on heavy bond paper that smelled like cheap cologne. It was signed by one Julian Vance, Esquire, threatening a lawsuit for tortious interference with established water conveyance, emotional distress, and, my personal favorite, deprivation of scenic enjoyment. They were claiming that because I had allowed the visual amenity of green pastures to exist previously, I was now legally obligated to maintain that aesthetic for her subdivision's property value, which meant I couldn't shut off the water she was stealing to water her view. It was legal gibberish, the kind of scare tactic designed to make a simple man fold because lawyers are expensive, but they didn't know I'd spent 20 years reading government contracts for heavy equipment. I knew a bluff when I saw one. But Patty wasn't waiting for the courts. Saturday morning, the sound of diesel engines woke me up. Not my tractors, something lighter, higher pitched. I looked out the window and saw a yellow mini excavator tracking across my lower pasture, ripping up the sod I'd spent 5 years nurturing. I didn't even bother with a shirt. I grabbed my boots, my hat, and my phone, sprinting out the door with Buster barking his head off. There was Patty, standing by the fence line in a sun hat, directing the operator like she was building the pyramids. Dig it up, she was shouting. The connection point is right there. We have to bypass his shutoff. I vaulted the fence, adrenaline masking the ache in my knee. Kill the engine. I roared, pointing at the operator, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20. He looked at me, looked at Patty, and hesitated. Keep digging. Patty screamed. I have an emergency utility easement warrant. You have a piece of paper you printed off the internet. I yelled back, stepping into the path of the bucket. Son, you are trespassing on private land, destroying agricultural property, and if you dig 1 foot further, you're going to hit a 220-volt line that runs the well pump. You hit that, you fry the machine, and maybe yourself. Shut it down. The kid's eyes went wide. He hadn't signed up to die for a koi pond. He keyed the engine off, the silence rushing back in, broken only by Patty screeching. You liar. There's no power line there. He's obstructing justice. She tried to climb the fence to get to the machine herself, her face twisted into a mask of pure entitlement. I am authorized. The HOA charter allows for emergency infrastructure repair. Patty, I said, my voice dangerously low, you don't have an HOA charter that covers my land. You don't have an easement. You have a criminal trespassing charge coming your way. That's when she made her mistake. She grabbed a shovel from the back of the excavator, shoved past the operator, and slammed the spade into the dirt right where I told her not to dig. I will do it myself, she yelled. Crarak pop. A spark the size of a welding arc flashbanged the air as the shovel tip sliced through the conduit I had warned them about. The breaker at the main pole tripped with a sound like a gunshot, but not before the jolt threw Patty backward onto her expensive yoga pants. She screamed, not from pain, but from the sheer shock of reality interfering with her delusion. Smoke curled up from the scorch mark in the grass. The operator jumped out of the cab and ran for the road. I stood over her, looking down at the smouldering hole in the ground. "You're lucky that breaker is new," I said, cold as ice. "Get off my land." She scrambled up, looking at me with pure venom, shaking not from fear but from rage. "You rigged that," she spat. "You booby-trapped it. Attempted murder. I'm calling the FBI. I'm calling the governor." She retreated, but as she walked away, she turned back, and for the first time, I saw the real threat. It wasn't the yelling. It was the smile. A tight, confident, predatory smile. "You want to play by the rules, Caleb? Fine. We'll play by the rules. All of them." I thought that was the end of the skirmish, but it was just the opening shot. 2 days later, I came home from town to find a notice taped to my gate. Not a legal notice, but a flyer. Public hearing. Community Resource Management and Safety Review. Location: Thorns Ridge Ranch, South Pasture. Time: Saturday, 10 a.m. She was hosting a town hall meeting. On my land. To discuss seizing my land. I called my buddy lawyer, an old trout fishing pal named Dan. He laughed until he choked. "Caleb, she can't do that. It's trespass, harassment, and about 10 other things. Do you want me to file an injunction?" "No," I said, looking at the security camera footage of her sneaking onto my porch to tape the flyer up. "Let her have her meeting. In fact, I'll set up the chairs." I spent the next 3 days preparing. I didn't mow the lawn. I didn't fix the fence. I set up trail cams in every tree, high-definition microphones along the fence line, and I went to the county clerk's office and pulled every permit, every deed, and every scrap of paper related to the Meadows subdivision. What I found was interesting. There was no HOA. Not legally. The developers had dissolved it 5 years ago when the project went bankrupt and got bought out by a holding company. Patty had just made it up. She created a Facebook group, printed some letterhead, and started collecting dues from the new residents to pay for common area maintenance, which mostly seemed to involve landscaping her own front yard. She wasn't a president. She was a grifter. And her brother, Julian Vance, disbarred in Oregon for fraud, currently operating as a legal consultant because he couldn't legally practice law. Saturday came. I unlocked the gate. I watched from my porch as about 30 neighbors filed in, looking uncomfortable, holding coffee cups. Patty was there, wearing a blazer and holding a megaphone, looking like she was running for Senate. She set up a folding table right in the middle of my cow pasture. "Welcome, everyone." Her amplified voice echoed off the hills. "We are here to address the tyranny of our neighbor, Mr. Thorne, who hoards the water that belongs to our children, endangering our property values and our safety." I let her rant for 10 minutes. I let her tell them I was violent, that I was unstable, that I was polluting the groundwater with toxic ranch runoff. The neighbors were nodding, getting riled up. Mob mentality is a scary thing. All it takes is one confident voice to turn decent people into a pitchfork brigade. Then, when she paused for breath, I walked down the hill. I didn't bring a megaphone. I brought a projector and a portable screen I'd set up on the back of my flatbed truck. "Morning, folks," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet air. "Before you sign that petition Patty's passing around, the one giving her emergency power of attorney over community disputes, I thought we should watch a movie." Patty turned pale. "This is a closed meeting. You have no right." "It's my pasture, Patty," I said, clicking the remote. "You're the one standing in cow manure." The video started. It wasn't just the footage of her digging with the excavator. It was footage from 3 nights prior, grainy night vision from my trail cam. It showed Patty, dressed in black, creeping up to my well pump with a hacksaw. It showed her trying to cut the lock. It showed her failing, kicking the pump, and then, this was the kicker, pulling a bottle of bleach out of her bag and pouring it into the ground around the wellhead, trying to poison the very water she claimed she wanted to save. The crowd went silent. Dead silent. You could hear a hawk screech a mile away. That's doctored." Patty shrieked, her voice cracking. "That's AI. He's a hacker." "And this?" I asked, clicking to the next slide. It was a PDF from the Oregon State Bar Association listing Julian Vance's disbarment for embezzling client funds. Then the next slide, the county record showing the Meadows HOA had been dissolved in 2019. You've been paying dues to a ghost, folks. Ask Patty where that money went. The neighbors turned on her. It wasn't a slow turn, it was instant. Questions started flying. Where is the money, Patty? Is that why we don't have insurance? You poisoned the ground. Patty looked around, her empire crumbling in real time. She dropped the megaphone. You're all ungrateful, she screamed, tears streaming down her face, mascara running like black oil. I did this for you. I am the only one holding this community together. He's the villain. He's the monster. She ran. She literally ran back to her car, leaving her constituents standing in my field. I thought I'd won. I thought shame would be enough to stop her. But I forgot one thing about narcissists. When you destroy their fantasy, they don't give up. They try to destroy your reality. That night, as I was feeding Buster, a black sedan pulled up to my gate. Not the sheriff. A sedan with government plates. A woman stepped out, looking grim. Mr. Thorne. I'm Agent Lewis with Child Protective Services. We received a credible report of endangered minors being held in a locked-out building on your property. We need to inspect the premises immediately. I stared at her, my blood turning to slush. I don't have kids. I live alone. The report was very specific, sir, she said, her hand resting near her belt. It claims you are keeping undocumented children for labor. If you don't open the gate, I will return with a warrant and a SWAT team. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like I'd swallowed a coal from the wood stove. Accusing a man of stealing water is one thing. Accusing him of harming children is a bell you can't UN ring, a stain that doesn't wash out even after you prove it's a lie. I opened the gate for Agent Lewis, moving like a robot, every muscle in my body coiled tight. Search it all, I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. Barns, basement, crawl spaces. Tear it apart. And she did. For 2 hours, I stood on my porch watching a stranger rifle through my underwear drawer, shine flashlights into my haylofts, and question me about why I had a spare bedroom set up, which was for my sister's kids when they visited once a year. When she finally came back to the porch, Agent Lewis looked different. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a weary frustration. Mr. Thorne, I apologize, she said, tucking her clipboard under her arm. It's clear the report was fabricated. Maliciously so. The caller gave details that, well, they imply they've been watching you, but clearly don't know the reality inside the house. It was Patricia Vance, I said flatly. I know it, you know it. Lewis sighed, rubbing her temples. I can't reveal the source. Anonymous tips are protected. But I will flag this in the system. If we get another call from this individual, it will be vetted differently. You have my word. She drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence that felt heavier than before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my dark living room with a shotgun across my lap, watching the security monitors. I knew Patty was desperate. I had exposed her fraud, humiliated her in front of her kingdom, and now her nuclear option with CPS had fizzled out. A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered narcissist with a god complex is lethal. I called Dan, my lawyer buddy, at 3 a.m. We need a restraining order, I told him. And I need you to contact the DA about the fraud. I'm done playing defense. Already on it, Caleb, Dan mumbled, clearly asleep. But listen, guys like her brother, Julian, they don't go down easy. If he's involved, watch your assets. They might try a lien scam next. He was psychic. The next morning, I went to the hardware store to pick up some fencing wire, and my card was declined. Insufficient funds, the cashier said, looking at me with pity. I checked my bank app. Frozen. All of it. A pending litigation hold had been placed on my accounts. I stormed into the bank, demanding answers. The manager, a guy I'd known for 10 years, looked pale. Caleb, I'm sorry. We got a court order this morning. A lien filed by the Meadows Community Association for $250,000 in damages to shared infrastructure. Until the hearing, the assets are frozen. It's a fake, HR. I slammed my fist on the desk. It doesn't exist. The paperwork looks real, Caleb. It has a judge's stamp. You have to fight it in court. I walked out of the bank with $40 in cash in my pocket and a heart full of darkness. They were trying to starve me out. If I couldn't buy feed for the cattle, couldn't pay the electric bill, I'd have to sell. And guess who would be the first in line to buy the land at auction? I drove home, driving too fast on the winding gravel roads. When I turned the corner onto my property, I saw it. Smoke. Black, oily smoke rising from the north pasture, the one closest to the woods, where the wind would carry it straight toward my house. My stomach dropped. I floored the truck, bouncing over ruts, busting through the gate without waiting for the opener. I bailed out before the truck stopped rolling, grabbing the fire extinguisher from the bed, but I knew it was useless. The brush pile I'd been meaning to burn in the winter was blazing, and the flames were licking at the dry timber of the old pole barn. Buster! Inside! I yelled, whistling for the dog. I grabbed a garden hose, my own hose, and started spraying the perimeter, trying to wet down the grass to create a firebreak. The heat was intense, singing my eyebrows. I was a wildland firefighter for 20 years. I knew fire behavior. This wasn't natural. It was moving too fast, smelling like kerosene and accelerant. I fought it for 20 minutes, coughing smoke, eyes streaming, until the volunteer fire department trucks came roaring up the drive. We got it knocked down just feet from the barn wall. Sheriff Miller was with the fire crew. He walked over to where I was sitting on the bumper of the fire truck, covered in soot, gasping for air. He held up a plastic gas can he'd found in the ditch. "This yours, Caleb?" "No," I coughed. "I use metal cans. Safety standard." Miller nodded grimly. "We found tire tracks near the access road. Skinny tires. Like a luxury SUV. And Caleb, we found footprints. High heels." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw real anger in his eyes. "This is arson, Caleb. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. This is a felony." "Then arrest her," I said, wiping soot from my face. "Go get her." "We need proof," Miller said. "Hard proof. The gas can is generic. The tracks are circumstantial. If we arrest her now, her brother will have her out in an hour and she'll sue the county for false imprisonment. We need to catch her in the act." "In the act?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "What's she gonna do next? Bomb the house?" "Maybe," Miller said. "Or maybe she'll try to finish what she started with the water. Narcissists obsess over the thing that denied them. She's fixated on that well." So we set the trap. I didn't fix the fence where she'd cut it. I left the gate slightly ajar. I turned off the floodlights on the south side of the house. And then I waited. I sat on the roof of my porch, wrapped in a dark blanket, with a high-powered camera and a shotgun loaded with rock salt. Non-lethal, but it sends a message. Sheriff Miller was parked a half-mile down the road, lights off, waiting for my signal. It happened at 2 a.m. A shadow detached itself from the tree line. Then another. 2 figures. One moving awkwardly, stumbling in the dark, Patty. The other moving smoother, carrying a heavy tool bag, Julian. They weren't coming for the hose this time. They were heading straight for the well house. I watched through the telephoto lens as Julian pulled out a heavy pipe wrench and a crowbar. Patty was holding a flashlight, whispering frantically. They reached the concrete pad. Julian started working on the bolts of the well cap. They weren't trying to steal water anymore. They were trying to destroy the pump head, to drop debris down the casing and ruin the well permanently. That's a $100,000 fix. I let them get the first bolt off. I needed destruction of property to stick. Then, I hit the button on my phone that controlled the new floodlights I'd installed that afternoon. Click HUMMM. 4,000 lumens of LED light flooded the yard, turning night into noon. Paddy screamed and dropped the flashlight. Julian froze, the wrench still gripped in his hand. "Smile." I shouted from the roof, snapping a burst of photos. "You're on candid camera." Paddy looked up, squinting into the light, her face twisted in a rictus of hate. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "This is entrapment." "No, Paddy," I called down. "Entrapment is when cops trick you. I'm just a guy watching you commit a felony." Julian, smarter than his sister, dropped the wrench and started to run toward the fence. "Don't bother, Julian." I yelled, "Look at the road." Red and blue lights erupted from the darkness as Miller and 3 other deputies swarmed the perimeter. Police! Get on the ground. Now! Julian hit the dirt instantly, hands behind his head. He knew the drill. But Patty didn't drop. She grabbed the crowbar her brother had dropped. She looked at the cops, then looked at my well, then looked at me. For a second, I thought she was going to charge the police. Instead, she swung the crowbar wildly at the well pipe, clang, clang, screaming inarticulate rage, trying to break something, anything, to win just a little bit. Miller tackled her. It wasn't gentle. She went down fighting, kicking, screaming that she owned the county, that we were all peasants, that she was the queen. They had to zip-tie her legs to get her in the cruiser. The aftermath was a slow, satisfying burn. The police searched Patty's house and found the HOA laptop. It was a goldmine. Forgery, embezzlement, wire fraud. She'd stolen over $50,000 from her neighbors. Julian had forged the court order for the bank lien. That got him a federal indictment. The arson investigation linked the gas can purchase to Patty's credit card. They went away. Not for a weekend, but for a long time. Patty got 5 years for arson and fraud. Julian got 7. But the real ending happened about a month later. I was fixing the fence, properly this time, when a car pulled up. It was a minivan. A couple I recognized from the disastrous town hall meeting got out. It was the Davises, a young couple with a baby. I stiffened, ready for another fight. But the husband, Mark, held up a hand. "We come in peace, Caleb." His wife, Sarah, was holding a basket. We brought you some muffins," she said, looking embarrassed. "And a letter. From the neighborhood." I wiped my hands on my jeans and took the envelope. Inside was a letter signed by almost every resident of the Meadows. It apologized for the harassment, for believing the lies, and for the silence when I was being attacked. It also stated that they had formed a real neighborhood council, one that had voted unanimously to pay for the damages to my fence and barn out of a collection they'd taken up. "We didn't know," Mark said. "She told us you were the reason our water bills were high. She told us you hated us. We just wanted to live in a nice place." I looked at them, at the baby sleeping in the car seat. I realized they were just pawns. Patty had weaponized their fear to feed her ego. "Keep the money," I said, handing the envelope back. "Use it to fix the drainage in your subdivision so you don't flood out next spring." I checked the grading. The developers cut corners. Mark looked stunned. You'd help us." "I'm a neighbor," I said, taking a muffin from the basket. "That's what neighbors do. Just don't touch my fence." Mark laughed, a genuine sound of relief. "Deal." I stood there watching them drive away, biting into a blueberry muffin that was surprisingly good. The silence of the high country settled back over Thorns Ridge. The cattle were grazing. The well was humming quietly, pumping life into the soil. It was over. But it got me thinking, sitting there on the tailgate of my truck. We live in a world where people are so desperate for control, so terrified of being insignificant, that they'll burn down a stranger's livelihood just to feel powerful for 5 minutes. Patty wasn't just a crazy lady. She was a symptom of a society that's forgotten that ownership isn't about dominance, it's about stewardship. She wanted to own the view. I just wanted to work the land. So, here's my question to you folks listening tonight. Where is the line between community standards and private rights? At what point does a neighborhood association stop being about keeping property values up and start being a little tin pot dictatorship? And if you were me, knowing what you know now, would you have forgiven the neighbors who stood by and watched, or would you have let them drown in their own mess? Let me know in the comments. I read them all. This is Caleb Thorne, signing off from the Ridge. Keep your fences strong and your powder dry.